Let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Shakira Rifos, and I'm the Education Outreach Manager at the California Film Institute. We are really excited to have you here to talk about the film that you just watched, Our Stolen Futures, and to dive a little bit deeper into the subjects of the film who really make this film kind of as exciting and as thrilling as it is. The education department saw this film last year before we went into lockdown at the we saw part of the film at the San Francisco Green Film Festival. And even though it was just a snippet, we automatically knew that we wanted to work with not only the subject of the film, which is extremely urgent and interesting and helps people to understand what organizing work looks like, but also the specific subjects who we have the opportunity to meet. So today we want to welcome Marissa Zuckerman, Jackie Ali Cordoba, and Muriel McDonald. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right. Before we go into the real official nitty gritty, why don't you all give us a little bit of an introduction? Sorry. Just let us know what brought you to this organizing space. What was a driver for you to get involved, and how are you doing these days?
I guess I can go first because on my screen I'm at the top. I don't know if everyone's order is different. My name is Jackie Ali Cordoba. I got involved in Sunrise in late 2018. And for me, it was definitely like a matter of I had just read that 2018 IPCC report that I think came out in August, that it was like the really terrible, scary one. And I was feeling like pretty down, pretty hopeless, scared, looking at the government that we had and like the actions that hadn't been taken. And Sunrise kind of like came into my life at like the exact right moment. Like I saw the action that they did at Nancy Pelosi's office in DC. And then I was like, oh, wait, like I can do something with all this hopelessness. Like I can turn it into action, and then then I don't feel hopeless anymore. And so that's kind of how I got involved. Um, I, yeah. Oh, I think you're muted, Shakira.
Sorry, Marissa, Muriel, just go ahead and pick.
I can go real quick. So I also got involved around the same time that Jackie did in 2018. That was, I think, a really scary year when the impacts of the climate crisis started to come home in a very tangible way, especially for those of us on the West Coast, with a really bad year of smoke from forest fires and that terrifying IPCC report that came out. And it kind of wasn't the only report. There was a lot of like, all the birds are going to be dead next year kind of doom headlines that were just really hard to take and not do something about. And that kind of coincided with Sunrise coming into my consciousness as a place where I could organize. And it just felt so much better to be doing something about this terrible crisis than to not be doing something. Yeah, and I think that's like something I've learned is like my ability to cope with what's going on is best when I'm doing something about it. And that continues to be true today. Yeah. Over to you, Mo.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I first got involved in climate organizing when I was in college doing fossil fuel divestment organizing, and was part of a network of a couple hundred different campaigns on college campuses, universities around the country. And, you know, we were building student leadership and doing trainings and coordinating all these young people all over. And we were winning some things. We were getting our schools to commit to stop investing in this industry that was destroying our future that we were supposed to be preparing for in college. We were looking around at the impacts, the growing climate impacts, looking at what our political leaders were just entirely failing to do. And then Trump got elected, and it just became so clear that we needed to start organizing on a much larger scale, and build more serious power to actually influence the country at large, influence the policies and the culture and how society looks at these issues. So Sunrise was born, and yeah, there was a group of us from around the country who kind of gathered for this first kickoff training to learn about this plan, and then to go home to our different communities and cities around the country and start Sunrise, start these local chapters, and start building out this network that now has become hundreds and hundreds of chapters of hubs around the country, with many tens of thousands of young people organizing all over the place. And I would really agree with Muriel and Jackie that doing something and feeling like, yeah, we do have some power to shift what's happening to us. We don't have to just sit back and accept this, is what drives me to keep going and what made me want to get involved.
Excellent, thank you. I think that all of us or younger folks are kind of trying to remove the idea of not talking about politics or religion or money at the dinner table. And I think we've all had an experience where we're arguing with like maybe family members and trying to convince someone to see our side. There's a quote in the documentary from a talk show that talks about Larry Kramer. If you don't know Larry Kramer, please look up his work with ACT UP and the AIDS movement. Larry Kramer went after Elizabeth Taylor, who was like a notable AIDS activist, but he still wanted to like push her to do more. And they asked why. He said, because if I go after someone who knows nothing about my life and is not interested and is somewhat the enemy, nothing is going to get done. And I'm going to be spending a lot of energy on someone who won't move. But if I speak with someone who is somewhat aligned with my point of view, maybe if they have influence, I can help them see something differently and they can help me make a dent. We have now gotten rid of the Trump administration. And Congress has gone to, swung towards a more left direction. How has your strategy in this new political landscape shifted, or has it shifted at all?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. Well, I think that quote sums up a lot of our strategy very well. We could, bang our heads against the wall until the end of time, trying to get Mitch McConnell to accept that climate change is an urgent crisis, and we never get anywhere, and we've seen that firsthand. So that's why in all of our work, we aim to move people who have the potential to be sympathetic to us, who are or should be on our side, and they just need a little extra push to know that we have their backs. And we're asking them to take a stand, to be brave, to do something that might be a little bit politically risky. And it's our job as a movement to give them that political cover to take that stand, and then to hold them accountable if they refuse to do that. And I think we did this during the Trump administration, where we were never trying to get Trump to pass climate legislation. That was not going to happen. So instead, we tried to work with Democrats, and it's a case-by-case basis around how that strategy is going to work. And you want to try to build bridges and build that partnership where you can. And it really just depends on the individual member of Congress or the target. But in this way, we have been able to kind of influence a lot of the Biden administration climate policy. So many of the executive orders and commitments that he made during his campaign would not have happened if it weren't for movement groups like Sunrise and so many other partners pushing really hard on his administration to take a stronger stand and to make those commitments. And now we are ready to work with him. The Sunrise Movement National Director Varshini Prakash was on a task force with AOC and others to actually help shape what some of these recommendations look like. So we very much are willing to kind of play that inside game, help shape what the policy is actually going to look like, and play that outside game, help build up the movement that's going to push it forward and hold leaders on both sides of the aisle accountable to make sure that they actually follow through.
I would add to that really briefly. I think, that's very well said, Mo. And one way that I like to think about it is in terms of the Overton window, or like kind of like what's in the air. I think so many politicians, especially Democratic politicians, kind of want to say the right thing. They want to please the most people. And they're going to go wherever they perceive the middle to be, or wherever they perceive the reasonable opinion to be. And the oil industry is never going to take a day off, and they are not resting for a moment. And so they are always out there saying the reasonable opinion is the middle of the road is way over here. And they're taking way more extreme opinions, like, calling natural gas freedom gas and saying that we can never get off fossil fuels. And then the left is over here saying, well, climate change is real. And then the middle of those two opinions ends up being like, we'll transition sometime in the next 100 years when everybody feels good about it. And obviously that's a death sentence. So our job here is to like pull the whole spectrum of opinions over. And so even if we aren't successful at getting all of our representatives to say, you're right, the Green New Deal, I love the Green New Deal, that's okay, because we've pulled the Overton window over. The Green New Deal's this new kind of post on one end of what we're asking for. And now the fossil fuel industry seems much further to the right, as they should. And now we've got, someone like Biden who really just follows where the group wants to go, and wants to do the right thing, whatever pleases everyone. And now that looks like climate action. So I think that that's such a key part of what climate activists have done and have to keep doing.
And I think the last thing I would add to that is a lot of the strategizing is around creating the right terrain for the changes that we need to happen and to be more likely to happen. Like, you plant these seeds, depending on what soil you're planting it in, like, you're more likely to get success. And so, on rough terrain, like, in a state like Texas, or like during the Trump administration, a lot of the strategy is partially around like removing the obstacles, those people who are never going to pass climate legislation, the Mitch McConnells, the Donald Trumps, the Abbotts, Greg Abbotts of the world, right? Like, you cannot convince them. So your job is to replace them with someone who you can convince. Like, that person may be in your corner, already a fierce champion for climate action, or they may be like, a centrist Democrat in like a more conservative state. And then it's like, okay, now my job is to get you in there to remove all excuses, because in a lot of modern politics, like, the blocking of the opposition blocking climate legislation has been used as an excuse. Like, oh, we'd love to pass that, but like, we just don't have the votes. And it's like, if we remove those obstacles, suddenly we get to see how much you really meant it when you said, we'd love to do bold climate action, but like, we just don't have the power. I'm like, okay, we gave you the power. Now there's no excuse. And now our pressure is strongly on you to get something done.
Thank you. Jackie, I actually want to pivot back to you about Texas. We likely have some younger viewers of this panel right now. Would you be able to, you are in Texas right now. Would you explain to them what has been going on in Texas in the past week, and why that is, and how it's directly related to the work that you're doing? And just in general, how are you?
So just for a little context, I grew up in Houston, Texas for like most of my childhood. I live in San Francisco like as an adult, but I came back for part of the pandemic and then stayed here a little longer than expected. I will be returning to California, but like, I've been in Houston since October at this point now. And last week we basically had this like winter storm that was coming and bringing, really, really low temperatures, like unprecedented temperatures to Texas. Like, they said, we haven't seen cold this low in like 40 years. And so there were places in like the teens, single digits, I'm farther south in Houston, so we only got as low as like, I guess the high teens, which is still pretty low for Texas. And, you know, what happened was the state basically told us there's going to be snow, there's going to be ice, get everything you need to not have to drive or leave your house because the roads are going to be incredibly dangerous because we don't have salt to salt the roads, right? And that's all you have to do to prep is like, just get ready to not have to drive. And then we'll see you in a week. So Monday comes around, the cold temperatures come, like it snowed, it iced everywhere, everything's white. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like we have a fully stocked fridge. We just went grocery shopping, all this stuff. This is awesome. And then we lost power at like 7 a.m. And the first communication the state gives out to us is like, oh, these are rolling blackouts. You'll lose power for like an hour or two at a time, and then we'll give it back to you. And then, you know, 4 hours later, the power's not back on. And we're like, what's going on? And an interesting thing about Texas is that even though a lot of heating infrastructure and like other stuff runs on natural gas, like you need electricity to run the heater. So if you don't have power, you don't have heat. And so what ended up happening was like this disaster developed that was a combo, one part climate disaster in that the reason these, you know, increasing amounts of like cold bursts are coming down is like the jet stream is weakening in the Arctic and that brings polar vortexes down, et cetera. And that's happening more often. But the other part, man-made disaster through a combo of like decades of deregulation means that Texas's energy grid is basically like fully for profit. It's like driven by profit. So if if you can't make money having backup power, if you can't make money winterizing infrastructure so that cold temperatures don't shut down the whole energy grid, like the private providers won't do it. And so we had something smaller happen like 10 years ago that was very similar. It didn't get quite as cold and it wasn't quite as bad. But in that, you know, 10 years ago moment, the state was warned like, hey, the energy grid is very vulnerable to cold temperatures. If another storm like this happens, it could be catastrophic. And, you know, nothing happened because there's no money to be made in taking these precautions. And because it's a very private and deregulated energy system. And so for most of last week, the vast majority of the state of Texas was out of power. A lot of parts of the state were out of water. So a lot of people without heat. There were a ton of people. It's like a man-made tragedy, honestly. Like there were people who died in their houses of hypothermia because in Austin, Texas, for example, which is like a couple hours north of me, the temperatures outside were in the single digits. So in your house, you were in the teens, right? And if you don't have, you know, in Texas, like if you've lived in Texas your whole life, you don't have winter clothes. Like I went to school in Boston. I have like winter clothes. So when the heat was out, like it sucked, but I was warm. There are a lot of people here who like the warmest thing they have is like a couple of hoodies. And that's just like not going to fly when your internal temperature is like 19 degrees, 20 degrees for days, you know, like an entire week. And so I think one of the interesting things about this whole issue is like, if I knew, you know, I was like, I really want a Green New Deal right now, but like, I didn't think I could possibly want it more, but like now I'm just like, this has to happen right now because there were so many preventable man-made things. And like one huge component of the Green New Deal is like a resilient energy infrastructure system, a national energy grid that can put up with like these stresses that are going to be placed on it, you know, whether that's extreme heat or extreme cold in places where that doesn't usually happen, and being able to like have a robust energy system that guarantees that people aren't left in like to freeze in their homes for 4 days straight. And I didn't even get started on like the water system, but like that was, yeah, there was a whole period where like you couldn't drink the water. Some people still don't have water because their pipes burst and stuff like that. And it's been an interesting week to see like kind of the failures of the old system that we have, where it's like profit over people. And then this is the outcome of decades of that. I have seen like a lot of great things in the follow-up. Like there was a lot of organizers, a lot of groups. Sunrise hubs in Texas were raising money for mutual aid. Sunrise groups in Texas were like volunteering at like food pantries. I saw like the DSA and a couple other groups were setting up drop-offs where people could buy, you know, if they could find it, bottled water. That's also, by the way, why I'm drinking bottled water. They said it's clean now, but my mom is like, let's give it a couple of days just because like, I don't know, this is the same government that didn't warn us that we were in an emergency until it was too late. So I'm like, okay, I'll drink bottled water for a few extra days. But like there was a lot of the organizing here looked like helping people stay warm, checking on people, getting people the food and supplies that they need, getting people the blankets they need to basically survive a massive cold front and the stuff that comes after.
Jackie, I thought it was so interesting to see how, like, as this crisis was basically beginning, the Texas governor, Governor Abbott, went on TV and said, "This is the Green New Deal's fault," and you know, just like the absurdity of that, and you know, the messaging war that's ensuing from this, where the fossil fuel industry completely screwed it up and failed, and they are out there really pushing this message that it was wind energy's fault, which of course is, you know, renewables are like what, 10 to max 20% of Texas's grid. So I don't think that renewables going out would have caused this disaster, but there's this full on messaging war to say, see, this is why the Green New Deal is bad, which, you know, Texas doesn't have a Green New Deal. And of course, the Green New Deal is in fact the solution. But it's this kind of like dystopic messaging war going on where, you know, literally he should have been on TV aiding with relief efforts and directing people what to do. And instead he was on there, you know, making excuses for a state that he runs, saying, well, I didn't cause this, it's the bogeyman, it's the Green New Deal. And then as much as that boils my blood and fills me with concern and like we have to win the messaging war, etc., I'm also like, oh, we're already winning because this is such a powerful idea, you know, a national energy grid that is resilient and connected and absolutely could have prevented this disaster, that they feel the need to attack it so out of the gate. It's the thing they're going after, and that's a sign to me that actually we're making a lot of
and actually just a quick thing to add is that Texas, you know, this week it was Texas having this issue, but like I found out later that most of the national energy grids are they were built in like the 1950s with an expectation that they would run for 50 years and then be upgraded, and it's now like 70 years and counting later. So it's like, this is not like, there are weaknesses all over the system, and if you stress test a system that is already past its date, you know, like this could happen anywhere in the United States, and it's just like terrifying that that's how easy it is.
Does it feel, as you know, activists and organizers, do you feel like in a state of an emergency or crisis like that, does it feel appropriate to push to take the opportunity to push the agenda even harder during these times, when you understand like you have to focus on the mutual aid and the fact that people are struggling, but also like this is the time to like galvanize folks because they're actually feeling the effects of what you all have been talking about and what folks in Texas may not have had the opportunity to see, and around the country. How do you kind of weigh that in this moment? And is that a conversation that you all have internally?
Yeah, I think like one of the ways to balance it is like in a crisis, you know, there are some people who are like, I need this assistance right now, and that's what I need. And like, you know, this is where like, okay, straight mutual aid, like you don't have to pitch anything, you know, is the best solution when someone's like, I urgently need this and I don't have time to think about anything else. But like in a crisis, there's also like a large number of people who are like, why is this happening? How did we get here? What's going on? How do we stop this from ever happening again? And like I had people, I mean, okay, so like there was no internet when there was no power, and then the cell networks were clogged because everyone who didn't have Wi-Fi was like trying to, so it's like there wasn't a lot of communication going on last week, but like when I did get signal or when I did reach out to people, like I had a lot of people in other parts of Texas messaging me like, what the heck is going on, and like why is this happening? And that's like an opening, you know, in a crisis, to say like, oh, this is happening because of these things that like we've been warning about for years, like deregulation, profit over people, not taking precautions to, like, if an energy utility is publicly owned, their goal, like they succeed if the power is on as much as possible. The uptime is their measurement of success. A private energy company, their success is measured in how much value they return to shareholders. And it doesn't actually matter whether the lights are on, as long as the value, and speaking of shareholder value, a lot of these utilities that didn't provide power for all of last week went onto earnings calls with investors saying like, our revenue is about to spike up because the price of energy is so much higher because of that week where like a bunch of fossil fuel plants froze and all this other stuff drove, the supply and demand, whatever. But like, they're already bragging about the amount of money they're going to be making off of this crisis, right? And so those are the moments where like, there is a balance when crisis is happening. Like, you don't just want to walk up to someone who's like, I need water. And you're like, have you heard about the Green New Deal? But like, there are people who are asking questions and who are frustrated, especially like after the immediate crisis is resolved. Like once someone has like the heat they need, the water, the shelter, right? There's a lot of anger and frustration. Like, why did this happen? And that why is the opening to say, this could be better. We could build something better. And this didn't have to happen.
Thank you for sharing your experience last week with us. I know that was sorry, those were some hard times for you and in your community. I want to pivot back to the documentary briefly. There are moments when you get met with like some wild and extreme condescension from adults in charge who use very weird tactics to dismiss what you're talking about. Why are we talking about this and why not gun control? You're not old enough to vote for me. When you're old enough to understand, maybe you can have my job. And Marissa, you were there with the moment in Dianne Feinstein's office, which a lot of people remember. I didn't know a lot about the Sunrise Movement at the time, but I remember seeing that come across my social media page and being like, oh, this can't be good. So you're there with a group of very young students and young revolutionaries who are empowered, and you're the one in charge. How do you keep the wherewithal to tell them to keep going, that this is just a bump in the road? Because time is different for kids, and they might feel a little bit more defeated when they're being told no, but this is a journey that is going to be longer than just that day in Dianne Feinstein's office. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what that kind of feels like for you, and how you manage that with younger people trying to follow your lead?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the reasons why that video struck such a nerve is that it is so emblematic of one of the most successful gaslighting of all time. I mean, we've just all been duped, and it's been a very intentional, multi-decades long, billions of dollars invested in conspiracy to convince the public that we are not in really dire straits here. And I think, one of the reasons that the whole climate fight is so hard is because it's huge and it's terrifying and it's really, really bad. And that's hard to face. Like, I know I can't face that, to be quite honest, on a day-to-day basis, because if we really let ourselves feel the magnitude of the crisis, it's devastating. And it's so wrapped up with other fights for racial and economic justice. It's a huge, huge challenge. And I think young people know this. I think this generation feels that in our bones more than any generation before. And it's confusing to look around, to see adults, to see our elected leaders who are supposed to be, at the very least, protecting our futures enough that we can live in some semblance of civilization. So to hear the science and then to see your elected leaders acting so differently, to really be dropping the ball on just the absolute minimum is deeply confusing. And I think, there's a whole lot we could say about how we got to this place and why denial has been such a core part of American politics for so long. But I think adults know. I think Dianne Feinstein knows how bad it is, and she's having to convince herself every day that she's doing the right thing. Because, those young people, when we were in her office that day, I was definitely not, the leader. We were all there as young people, as peers, and kind of by random chance, that group ended up in her office. I think that all of the young people in that room are so crystal clear on what needs to happen, because we know it's our futures and it's not hers. And I think that, that's one of the reasons I love the title of this film. It really feels like our futures are being stolen from us, and having that moral clarity is, I think, what drives a lot of young people to be able to stand up to adults, to elected officials, and call them out on their BS. And not to say that it isn't hard, because it really is. I think gaslighting is one of the best words for it. When you know these things to be true and nothing around you is reflecting that reality. And I think, the fact that it's so big also is one of the biggest opportunities. Like, we're facing so many crises in this moment. It's like a never-ending onslaught. It's no fun to think about an impending climate crisis. But if you think of it as an opportunity, not just to address ecological destruction and, planetary instability, but also think about our lives on a day-to-day basis, think about what it would mean for our communities to not only address climate and environmental injustice, but also racial and economic injustice. That vision of what our lives and our society could be like, I think, gives me at least the strength to be like, you know what, I don't care if you call me young and naive. Like, we're doing it anyway because your way isn't working. We're done with this. We're going to try something else. And I think we've gotten to a point where there are enough young people who it's pretty clear it's not working. The way we've been doing things is not going to cut it. So, I think that's where we're at. And I think that's how a lot of young people these days are approaching it. And it's unfortunate. I mean, I think we need an intergenerational movement. I think we need intergenerational solidarity. And there are so many older folks who are really amazing organizers in their own right and supporters. But it's a tough one.
Before I have two more questions, before we move on, I want to make sure to encourage the students watching now and watching live, and also the students watching this later, to encourage the Active Cinema Room that is attached to this program, and look at the resources that are available there for you to get involved and to get active as well. So I want to actually could kind of continue that line of questioning with Jackie and Muriel. There are two moments in the documentary, Jackie. There's one moment where you're kind of like questioning, like, am I saying the right thing? And you were getting a pep talk from one of your peers, and that was a really cool moment. And Muriel, there was a moment where you were like really emotional, kind of talking about, how important it was for you not to lose hope, but you were really sharing how you were feeling in that moment. Can you also just chat a little bit about how to overcome kind of that like dejection, and to really and to power up and to do the work that you are impassioned and inspired to do? What does that self-care look like for you?
Yeah, I think, so if I'm remembering correctly, I think this was like a pep talk right before I had to talk to a bunch of people on like the DNC day, and then also like disrupt the meeting at the DNC. So I honestly, I think for me, it's like all this stuff like on the outside, when you see someone giving like a really intense speech, or you see someone like taking action, it looks super easy, but it's like there is like an internal thing that you have to do to get yourself like ready to do these things. And I think a lot of times what I have to do is like think about, okay, like the alternative is so much scarier. Like me standing up in front of all these people, or me like trying to speak power to like the Democratic Party, or me like doing this action is way less scary than like doing nothing. And then like the stuff that happens if we fail to take action. And so I try to remind myself like, okay, this isn't like in this moment, this feels scary and stressful, but like this is for, you know, my entire generation, for this planet, for people right now who don't have a voice. Cause like I am hyper aware of the fact that like, even though I am a young adult, like I have the power of the ballot box. And there are people like, I've been worried about climate change since I was 13 years old. When I was 13, had the ignorance to think that the adults were handling it. So that's why I didn't panic. But like 13-year-olds today do not have the same luxury I had of thinking like, I'm worried about this issue, but I'm sure they're dealing with it. Like they're looking at this and they're like, I cannot vote. And these people are deciding what my future looks like. And I will not be able to vote for 5 years. Right. And that is like one of the most tragic parts of this catastrophe, is that like the people who are most affected do not get a voice. And so it is like, I think about them, and I think about all of the places that I care about, and like the ways in which these failures to do anything have hurt us, and what good things and what the world could look like if we succeed. And that's kind of where I pull the like, okay, like this is scary. There's a lot of adrenaline. And I'm just like, I'm just gonna talk to like, say the thing. We're gonna do this. We're gonna figure this out. And so, and I don't know, I guess self-care after a lot of it is just like, you know, celebrating the wins, and then like taking a little bit of time to celebrate the wins before looking over like, oh, what could have gone better? How could we have done something differently, etc.
Muriel, do you want to speak to that, to the moment in the documentary where, you know, you're frustrated but still like ready to fight? How do you get over that hump?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I a lot of strength from taking action. So for me, the frustration of feeling helpless is associated with not action. And you know, as Jackie was speaking, I was thinking, you know, for me, this is really just, it's a message. And you know, as Mo mentioned, this is, it sounds crazy. I feel crazy saying it. We've been really gaslit, but like we're a massive conspiracy to convince the American public that it's all okay and we can proceed with business as usual. And so we're working in this incredibly saturated media environment where information is just flying by and crazy things are happening every day. And the opposition of oil executives is incredibly well organized and incredibly clear about what their job is, and are doing a very good job of convincing the public that it's the Green New Deal's fault and that it's not real and that climate activists are crazy, etc. And it's our job to break through that environment of constant noise and do things that are so interesting and clear and morally admirable that they break through and get people's attention, come across their newsfeed, stick in their mind, and also communicate the message that we're trying to communicate with. This is an emergency, act like it. And that was such so much the message of our action at the DNC was like, we're sitting on these chairs like screaming like our hair's on fire because there is something really urgent and serious happening, and we're not going to be like the frog sitting in the warming pot of water until it boils. Like, we're jumping out, and you can either like act like it's an emergency with us or look like fools. And so just kind of remembering that, like when I do something really scary like stand on a chair, it's like, okay, I'm doing this because like we need to break through, and this is the only way that I know how to do it, that we know how to do it. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this question also kind of relates to, when students watching this conversation, again, please go to the Active Cinema Room and check out all the ways and the resources that we have set up for you to get involved if that's something that you would like to do. And maybe it's not the Sunrise Movement or climate change. Maybe it's racial justice or the fight for indigenous lands or the fight for against monuments. There might be students watching who feel there is a moment, there's a bug, they see their friends doing all of this cool work, but maybe they feel like, what does organizing take? You have to have all these skills to be an activist. You have to be good at public speaking. You have to be good at logistics. You have to have a microphone voice. And what if I'm not confident in those ways? What if I don't possess any of those skills? Surely there won't be anything for me to do. Can you all help students who feel an urge but maybe don't quite yet have the confidence? Can you help them understand that there's a place here for everybody?
Yeah. So I think one of the big things to know is like it looks like, oh, like we're all seasoned activists and we've been doing all this stuff. But like when I started, I didn't know anything. Like I was like, I do not know how to run a training. I don't know what an action is. I don't know anything about how to plan these things. I've never given a speech in front of this many people. Like I've never done anything like any of these things. And there's a lot of opportunities when you get involved in organizing to learn, because any group that's worth its salt will have trainings, will have like ways to help you get set up, and will provide you with support through like mentors who have done things before, or through other like maybe peers who are working on the same thing with you. And then the other key thing to remember is that like that side of organizing, the visible like actions and stuff, is just like one component of a very large ecosystem of things you can do. Like organizing can look like having one-on-ones with new members and figuring out what they're interested in and how they want to plug in. It can look like putting on a training with like people that are already in your movement but maybe haven't leveled up their skills. It can look like, collecting supplies and things in a disaster to help out your community. It looks like all sorts of different things. And so not everyone has to have like the microphone voice. It can look like writing articles and letters to the editor, and like it can look like making art for actions. Like you could literally just like make art for actions and like never show your face, and like you would be contributing to a movement in whatever capacity you want. And I think one of the other key things to remember is that like, yeah, like Sunrise has like a climate focus and like other groups have other focuses, but all these issues are so connected and the root causes and solutions are so connected that it's like you could really organize in any focus area and they're all going to touch each other, because there is no like climate justice without racial justice. There is no like migrant justice is like a huge component, and like the ways that climate affects like migrants and climate refugees and stuff. It's like everything is so connected that it's like I cannot list a single problem that does not tie to another problem in some way. So it's really just about, like where you want to focus first.
I would just add to that I think, what we're driving towards always from, winning the messaging war is to grow the movement, to get as many people as possible to become actively working towards, a just, sustainable future. And the best way to do that is to talk to your family and friends and to talk to the people closest to you. And so if you have family or friends, which probably all of you do, if you know how to talk to them, which probably you do, then you've got the most important organizing skill. So even if that just looks like this afternoon, if you feel inspired by this talk or the film, going to your friend and saying like, hey, I watched this thing on Zoom and it was actually pretty inspiring, and the climate crisis is crazy and we've never talked about that before because it's really heavy. What are you thinking about it? What would it look like for us to do something about it? Then you're doing the best possible thing you could do as an organizer, which is bring people in, talk to your community. It's no good to go stand in front of a crowd that doesn't know you and make a speech. Like, you bring the crowd, you build the crowd. That's the organizing work.
Marissa,
Yeah,
can you add to that?
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, we just totally agree with what Muriel and Jackie just said. We always need people to stand on chairs and yell. Muriel's great at it. That would terrify me. And sometimes I do it anyway, but it does terrify me. The vast majority of what it means to be in a movement is not that. That's the most visible part, but there are hundreds of people, so many hours of work that goes into making a moment like that possible. And I would just say, you know, whatever it is you do, whatever way you want to be involved, there is a place for you in the movement. And it's not only your job to find out what that is. Hopefully there will be people to help you, organizations that can help you find your place. But it is your responsibility to find out what that is for you. And it is so beautiful how many different possibilities there are for what that could look like. And, you know, Jackie just listed off a bunch of options. That list could go on forever. You know, we have spreadsheets with hundreds of rows of all the different roles that need filling. And I think the other thing I would say is that you don't have to do anything alone. In fact, you shouldn't be doing anything alone. Just, you know, similar to what Muriel just said, our power is in people. Our power is in building those relationships between our community members, between institutions and organizations and structures. And that is the only way that we're going to be able to be powerful enough to fight these crises. And it's also the thing that I think brings me some of the most joy of being part of a movement, is that it's how I find my place in a community. And we have that support. We give that support and we get that support, and we figure out together, what am I good at? What brings me joy? What do I have to offer and contribute? And maybe you won't find it right away, and it's okay if the first thing that you try isn't the right fit for you. There will be a right fit, and you know, Sunrise or whatever group you end up looking at, like Jackie said, should have training opportunities, should have structures of support to help you find that. Just don't give up until you find it, because we need you. I think that's the last I'll say, is that we really need every single person to find a role, large or small. It can be really small. It can be an hour a week, but we need everyone.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Of course, thank you. Right on, it's always a joy chatting with the three of you. I hope we get to have some more conversations soon. I'm sure this isn't the last time that your work will be documented, as you are all extremely inspiring. And I hope that that students were able to connect to something in this conversation, and that if they haven't already gotten started, that they're encouraged to make that move and to join a movement that is meaningful to them. Specifically on the Sunrise movement, students, don't forget to encourage the active cinema room that we have attached to this program. Go visit, because there's a lot of great resources, more information about the Sunrise movement and how you can get involved. We continue to love this documentary. Marissa, Jackie, and Muriel, thank you so much, so much for taking time to join us and to be a part of this presentation.
Thank you so much, Shakira. This is always a treat.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
All right, everybody, have a good day.